Greetings, everybody. My name is Keith Hammonds, and I am excited to welcome you to Ashoka's Welcome Change today. Thank you for joining. I'm actually a former Ashoka staffer, so hi to all my Ashoka friends who are watching. For the last 9 years, I have worked for a nonprofit organization called the Solutions Journalism Network, which is about transforming journalism so that all people have access to news that helps them envision and build a more equitable and sustainable world, which is why I'm very excited about today's conversation, because a lot of the questions embedded in the work of Solutions Journalism Network is kind of what we're going to attack today. Like, what is the purpose of journalism? Who is it for? Who gets to do it? So I am really pleased to welcome our guest today. Darryl Holliday is a journalist, participatory media advocate, media entrepreneur based in Chicago. He is co-founder and director of the News Lab at an organization called City Bureau, which is a civic journalism nonprofit based in Chicago's South Side, I believe. So, Darryl, journalism is a smallish world, and we work in highly intersecting realms. I've admired your work for years. Your thinking truly has helped to inform mine. But I think this is the first time we've had a real conversation. So I'm happy for this opportunity. For our audience, we're going to spend about 20 minutes, Darryl and I, in conversation. And then you'll have an opportunity to offer up questions and comments. You can do that using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So let's dig in. We're going to attack we're going to embrace, Darryl, your Columbia Journalism Review article from December called "Journalism is a Public Good. Let the Public Make It." But first, I want to sort of get into kind of your founding moment here. You started City Bureau in 2015 after working both in mainstream, or what we call mainstream journalism, right? Chicago Sun-Times, and also non-mainstream journalism like the Invisible Institute. So what was going on then? What was the gap you saw in 2015?
Let's see. So yeah, you're right. I've got experience in commercial media at the Sun-Times. At the time where we were really envisioning and mapping out City Bureau, I was actually working at an organization called DNA Info Chicago. I was a crime and mayhem reporter, so I was reporting on fires, murders, all the worst things that happened in the city.
Was that a real title?
Yes, that was my actual title for the first, I think, couple of years, crime and mayhem reporter. So we would listen to the police scanner, and I'd go drive down to the latest terrible event and report from the scene. I learned a whole lot about journalism in that stretch of time, both how it could be harmful in some ways and also how it could be better. So, you're asking what the trajectory was. I moved over to Invisible Institute, I think around 2014, 2015. We had a very welcome home there with Jamie Calvin and the group, and they allowed us really to be thinking about City Bureau while we were working on a project called CPDP, which made a ton of complaints by the public against police public in an interface online. So while we were doing that, we were really thinking about what needed to happen in Chicago and beyond, and that was how to address misrepresentative coverage of communities, especially the communities of color, how to address the lack of business models for public media or for journalism that could sustain, a more engaged, participatory media, and thinking about what kinds of who need to be involved in that work to really make it, to really reach journalism's ideals. I think of that kind of plurality of voices, the diversity of folks who are involved. Making sure that folks are being reached across the city and beyond. We were thinking about how to create an organization that could really center those things, and that is, and I hope continues to be, City Bureau.
I'm fascinated by this language, the crime and mayhem beat. Like I've literally never heard a beat called that before. And so on one hand, I'm sort of laughing at this, but it's actually, it's a serious thing, right? I mean, it reflects a lot of the way traditional media has covered low-income communities of color, which is all about their pathologies, right? So how do you shift that becomes an important question.
Right. And can you shift it? I mean, well, yeah, we can go on this track. I don't know if you want to go this route, but can it be fixed, or do we need just new structures that can reimagine and reinvent what journalism can be?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about that, because you use the phrase kind of around centering, and one problem, one pathology that your article surfaced was this idea that really journalism is centering itself rather than centering its audience and the information needs of that audience. And as long as we are centered in the idea of commercial media whose goal is to sustain itself, and journalism that is anchored in the idea of reporters who tell stories, professional reporters who tell stories about and for others, that's a problem. That's a pathology that has to be fixed, which you're attacking.
Yeah, I'd say so. And let me think through this a bit. I think in a lot of ways the bottom is falling out of commercial media, and for some good reasons. You mentioned journalism centers itself, which I agree with, but I'd say also a lot of journalism tends to center the powerful, the elite, and I think that's a function of how it's developed professionally over the years. I think if you look at from the Kerner report, the Kerner Commission report in 68. Onto the American, I'm forgetting ASME's nickname, but we've seen over and over again that newsrooms tend to not look like the areas they cover. They tend to be whiter, more male, more politically left, wealthier. That kind of imbalance, that lack of diversity, that lack of openness and transparency, I think it matters in the way that news is covered. You can see it in the way that journalism is covered. You mentioned earlier, crime and mayhem. What does that mean? A lot of communities of color, especially in Chicago, we've surveyed Chicagoans, 900 Chicagoans across the city in 2018. We found that by and large, communities of color, Black and brown communities in the city of Chicago, one, most have not met a journalist. Two, they tend to feel more misrepresented than their white counterparts in the city, and they tend to feel like journalists quote the wrong people. I think these are related things. If you don't have those folks in your newsroom as reporters, you're not going to get a good sense of them. We need them in the room. We need people of color in the room, all kinds of folks, again, a plurality. So I think a lot of how journalism has shaped up the leaning towards centering journalists, reporters, leaning towards centering power in the elite is really built into how the industry has shaped up. And so what I'm really talking about in that article is how do we open the doors? We talk about informing, engaging, and equipping people at City Bureau a lot. That equipping part is important. How are we sharing our skills, our resources for the betterment, like for thriving communities? And that, I think, will look different than what we have now.
Can you make that real for us? What does City Bureau actually do?
Yeah, sure. We have 3 year-round programs. One is a reporting fellowship, a paid reporting fellowship, where we bring together more emerging reporters, folks who maybe they couldn't afford the journalism school degree, but really feel passionate about journalism. We bring them together with more experienced reporters. They work together in our newsroom in Bronzeville in Chicago, and they produce work that is published Chicago and beyond. We host what used to be a weekly series pre-COVID is now a monthly online series of public newsroom events, what we call them, where we bring together folks who have interesting ideas that they want to share with the public or really vet with people. We help them draft a 2-hour workshop. It's very hands-on, a lot of small group discussions, a lot of moments of people discussing issues that are really civically engaged and matter to them, in some ways for the first time, with folks who also care about those issues. And then our last program is our Documenters Network, where we train and pay people, anyone across the city, to attend public meetings. So your city council, all the way down to the advisory committees, the sub-advisory councils, the minutia of government. They take notes, they live tweet, they take photos, audio, video, and especially as we know that newsrooms are closing, shuttering around the country, they're filling a gap. They're building community, but they're also they're producing information from these meetings that directly impact people's lives. And they look like the city of Chicago. They are 55% people of color. All of our programs are really aimed at bringing more voices into this field, especially voices that have been marginalized or kept out historically from the public narrative.
Mm-hmm. So you are building a network of journalists who are from their communities, who look like people in their communities, who know their communities. I'm curious, who makes decisions on what they report on?
Yeah, sure thing. For the reporting fellowship, our civic reporting fellowship, we have editors and reporters who have been working in newsrooms for decades. Folks like Bettina Chang, who's our editorial director and co-executive director, Alejandro Cancino, who just joined us from the Better Government Association. These are folks who have years of experience working in news. In our documentaries program, the network at large, everything that the documentaries produce, again, these are everyday folks who are being trained by us to attend public meetings. For one, they get trained, but two, they get edited. So they're really learning the skills of the trade. And I think in a lot of ways, we're democratizing the trade itself by distributing those more and more journalism skills, which I think are really civic skills, to more people.
Mm-hmm. And how does that structure and those mechanics translate into a different sort of journalism? Or let's say a different sort of flow of information? Yeah,
that's a great question. The flow of information, I think, is still a very tricky thing that I'm not sure if anyone's really cracked that puzzle. When we think about the flow of information, I think we're used to thinking about news, journalism. I tend to think more about the flow of information through a barbershop, or through a salon, or through a library, or through a public media outlet, or like a peg station. Trying to think more broadly about how information actually travels, and not get too hung up on it has to be capital J school degreed journalism.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot the first part of your question because I went on a tangent. So feel free to bring me back if I go on.
That's the right tangent. And one thing you wrote in your piece was thinking about journalism's theory of change, right? And the current theory of change, I think as you described it, was basically get bigger, right? And I would say my version of journalism's theory of change was basically if you expose bad things, the bad actors will get caught, right? And that's what journalism is. Both are true, I would guess. But what I pulled out as sort of a new theory of change is this. You wrote, a free press framed as a public good should be measured by the ability of people to engage in the ongoing processes for positive change in their communities. To me, that's so powerful. And so talk on that.
Yeah, I think historically journalism's theory of change, and I've been a little flippant, but I think it has been to get a bigger microphone and get powerful people to make changes, which I think, again, go back to what I said earlier, it's really easy to center the powerful when that is how change happens, is that we need the governor or the mayor or the alderman or whoever it is, we need them to read the stories so that they can write the policy. I think we're trying to flip that. So when I talk about a theory of change, reframing it towards, measuring the ability of people in your coverage area to engage in these big questions, to really to create the kind of civic action that they need. That looks different. I think that's more bottom up. So when we talk about documenters going to public meetings, they aren't just taking notes. They're doing that, but they're learning how public policy functions, right? And they're taking that back to their communities, and they do all kind of things. We've seen documenters who have noticed over time that public meetings have been, basically there's some errors in the way that's conducted according to like Robert's rules and all of that. They've contacted the Attorney General and had those meetings fixed, basically. So there's ways in which folks, once they really understand how these systems work, they get involved. I can't tell you how many times I've had someone tell me, I didn't know I could attend that meeting. You know, like that's level 0. Like we're starting not from like, how do we win a Pulitzer? It's how do we know that people know how to affect change in their communities? Policies are big. The things that are happening at the government level are all of our responsibility. And so we need more people engaged. So when I talk about kind of flipping the script a bit and thinking through how does a media outlet support, encourage civic action that is healthy and positive, I think those are new kinds of metrics that don't always have to go through the top to get to the bottom.
This is really about building the muscle for civic literacy.
Yeah,
or strengthening the muscle, let's say. Right.
Rebuilding it in some ways. And some, like when I hear questions like, you know, can I go to that meeting? I think we have some work to do. That's rebuilding these muscles, because these are really these are public function. These are all of our responsibility, not just journalists, not just politicians, all of us.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier barbershops and hairstylists as sort of civic institutions that are communications nodes, information nodes in real life. And in the piece, you talk about journalism as part of a broader civic information network. How are you doing that now, and how can it happen?
I want to see newsrooms look more like libraries. That's kind of one of my dreams is when I walk into a PEG station, like a public access TV station, I think, wow, these folks are hosting free trainings. They are making the equipment, like their resources, available for public use. They're providing a platform for like authentic community control. And I want to see more newsrooms look like that. So when we think more broadly around how, like, again, back to how information flows, I definitely want to be thinking about how folks really get their news. Of course, it's Twitter, of course, New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, but we also hear that people are hearing news word of mouth, right? And those matter. Those places when you're in the barbershop and you're talking and you're either hearing misinformation or you're hearing what you need, real accurate information, those points of intersection matter. And I think as journalists, we should take them very seriously and consider ourselves part of that ecosystem that is beyond just our newsroom.
I want to ask, well, we have a question from the participants. Jim McGinley asks, what is City Bureau's sustainable business model? Or what is the business model?
Yeah,
this is sustainable.
Sustainability. I mean, this is an interesting question. Like I said, I think the bottom is falling out of commercial media, right? Like we're going to have less, I think, commercial newsrooms in the future than we have even right now. And even just in the pandemic, we're seeing less. So I think that in a lot of ways, nonprofit newsrooms are correcting for market failures. So sustainability, sure, but I also don't think that's the primary question we need to be answering when we think about journalism. So I'll try to answer it though. We get foundation support. We have donors, so individual donors, big donors who contribute to the pool, and also we make earned revenue as we expand the documents network. Folks are paying us for the consultation, the technology that we provide, the materials, as we fundraise nationally to bring funds into the network. So we're trying to diversify the pool, but I push back on the question in some ways. I think there are a lot of questions around how the work is done and who can be involved that I want to put before, you know, how can we sustain this work for the next 50 years? I'm not sure that City Bureau or any other organization doing this work needs to exist forever. I think we need to tackle the questions that we're seeing right now.
Another question, Darryl, from Nikki Wilson. What do you know about the readership audience of participatory journalism, and how can the usual consumers of so-called mainstream journalism be persuaded to broaden their sources of news?
what do we see about the readers or the audience of participatory news? I think one interesting point here is that this is my favorite point about participatory media is that the producers are also the consumers. So we don't have to think about them separately, right? Like with journalism, traditional news, I am the producer of news and you are the audience and you'll kind of get whatever I produce. Participatory news, the people who are most impacted by an issue can also play a role in the creation of that news alongside journalists, which I think is a whole different dynamic. So the readers or the audience in some ways are the people in the communities of the folks who are involved. And what was the second part of the question?
Second was, how can consumers of mainstream news be persuaded to broaden their sources of news? And I guess the implicit there is like, how is City Bureau going to get more readers?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's so a couple of ways. We know just through surveying documenters that one of the most common way documenters find about the network is word of mouth through other programs. So that's an information pipeline. If folks are hearing about this opportunity from other people, they can also hear about the latest news or the most, the critical issues of our day from those people. So I think by broadening the pool of people who are involved in news production, by opening the doors, you increase the amount of the lanes that information can travel through infinitely, right? But on a more practical level, I think that we need to work on that first bit. The second part, I think partnerships are a great way. There are a lot of legacy papers who have over the years built up gigantic audiences, that can, I think, definitely be tapped. And I think there are a lot of folks in those audiences who are really interested in thinking about how news can better serve them, how it could look and feel more like the ways in which they share or need information.
Does City Bureau have partnerships like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. We work with organizations in Chicago in the Documenters Network, Documenters programs in Cleveland, in Minneapolis, and Detroit are working with the Detroit Free Press, like the Cleveland Observer. So absolutely, we are definitely thinking about not just how are we expanding the pool of people who are involved in this work, but also how are we working with people in our ecosystem to make better news.
Good, thank you. Bill Carter asks, could you speak to the intersection of journalism and so-called influencers? So-called is mine, not Bill's. He has influencers in quotes.
I'm not sure that I can. Journalism and influencers. I think it's an interesting question, right? Because influencers are what ostensibly people who are providing information. They have a large audience. Yeah, I'm not sure where to take that one. The route between journalists and influencers. I want to think through that more. Could we connect on a different end and tackle that one? I want to give it some thought and really address that question.
Yeah. Meantime, a question from, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Rhiannon Davies. In the UK, we don't have the same level of philanthropic and donor support that organizations such as City Bureau have been able to access. When a community newsroom exists on a shoestring, where do you think attention should be focused in order to create the biggest social impact and build community power?
I think it depends at what stage you're in. I think if it's early days and this is a shoestring budget, like City Bureau was there 6 years ago, we didn't come into this world with grants and donors.
We all start somewhere.
We all start somewhere, and usually that is no money, no problems. The volunteer staff. I think focusing on the organization itself is a really great place to begin in those early days. If you're a nonprofit, having a really solid board in place that can offer you advice and connections. If there's just a couple of folks really thinking through how you work together, drafting that out, really thinking through how, what are your values, the mission. I think focusing on those core issues, I put that before even how to make news, how to make journalism. Is your house in order, I think? And if the answer is yes, I think that's a whole different phase of the work where you have some stability and then you're moving into really thinking through like, what is the cover style? What's the Voices organization? How are we going to make money? Those are all very big questions that folks like Lion, like INN, I think are very well positioned to answer in more depth than I can in this 20 seconds.
Thanks. Okay, another question from Tom Stites. Darryl, bottom-up journalism seems very congruent with the reader-owned cooperative business model, which fits with documenters and might be sustainable institutions. The news co-op model is akin to credit unions, which are cooperative owned by their depositors. Have you given this model any consideration?
Yes, we know a couple of co-ops. I know of one in Maryland, and Block by Block, I believe, in Baltimore is a co-op. And there was a co-op in Akron called the Devil Strip. I think if you take a look at both those examples, I think you'll take a look at both those examples. I agree, though. I think that co-ops, the values, the mindset, the approach is very aligned with how we think about our work at City Bureau. We haven't considered turning City Bureau into a nonprofit just yet, but I am in conversation with people who are developing nonprofits, and I think looking to orgs like City Bureau, like Outlier Media, like Canopy Atlanta, like Resolve Philly. When I say nonprofit, I really should expand that because I'm including co-ops and other types of alternative structures in that broad list of, I think, folks who are really thinking through how to do news differently and are creating organizations that can sustain that work. So yes, I'm a fan of co-ops. I think there's a lot of work and kind of study to do on what needs to change in terms of how a co-op functions, but I agree that it's very aligned with our ethos at City Bureau and many other folks, I think, who are developing new organizations to tackle these problems.
Darryl, I want to ask you, before we close, one more question for my own account. So I have a side job, a night job, which is I own and publish a small weekly newspaper, like totally mainstream, in rural Montana. And the ideas that you have spun out at City Bureau and that we've talked about here, I would love to make happen and have worked on that over the last 3 years. And I can tell you, it's hard, right? This does not happen anecdotally or incidentally. It is real work to build the sort of connections that you've made. Sort of, it's culture change, not just for a news organization, but for the community. Absolutely. As well. So, can you offer me some advice? Like, how do I do this?
I'd want to hear more about your goals and where you want to take it. I mean, I can tell you that at City Bureau we are getting a lot of requests, I think, are similar to this. So I'm excited. I'm thrilled. I think that in some areas of the news industry, we're seeing things kind of fall apart, honestly. Again, I don't know how we can sugarcoat it. It's not doing well. But then on the other side, we're seeing this like rejuvenation, it's so fascinating. So we're getting a lot of inquiries like that. And from our part, what I can say is that if folks are interested in participatory civic media, we are expanding our documenters network beyond Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, Minneapolis, and would love to talk to anyone who really wants to incorporate more participatory style into a newsroom. But just real quick, I'd say things like, again, I'll take it back to public access PEG stations, things like hosting trainings for your community, like sharing skills and resources, opening up your newsroom, opening up the infrastructure, the facilities that you might have, democratizing the skills and sharing them, providing platforms for more people to learn about how to do journalism and really adapt it and revise it for this new era. I think those are some baseline ways I'd say. And then anything beyond that, I am more than happy to talk to anyone who wants to incorporate these practices or ideals or values into their work.
Great. We will talk more. Darryl, thank you so much for this. This is really a wonderful way to spend 30 minutes. I appreciate your time. And really, I'm so grateful for the work that you've done with your colleagues at City Bureau.
Same here, Keith. I appreciate the time, and also we say it's a city, bro, but we're standing on shoulders, right? We're hoisting folks up on our shoulders, and we're also standing on shoulders. And SJN has made a model, and just like the values, the frameworks that y'all provided have been influential. So I appreciate the work that y'all have done. I appreciate this call, and yeah, thanks everyone for dropping in.
All right, that's it. Thanks for coming, everybody. Have a great day.